Begin our next author presentation, I would like to present a land acknowledgement. The Lethbridge Public Library acknowledges that we are gathered on the lands of the Blackfoot people of the Canadian Plains and pays respect to the Blackfoot people past, present, and future, while recognizing and respecting their cultural heritage, beliefs, and relationships to the land. The city of Lethbridge is also home to the Métis Nation of Alberta, Region 3. Good day. I would like to now introduce Jill Adamson. She's very well known. She's a critically acclaimed author of The Outlander, which won the Dashiell Hammond Prize for Literary Excellence in Crime Writing, the Amazon.ca First Novel Award, and the Relit Award and the Drummers General Award. Was a finalist for the Commonwealth Book Prize and CBC Canada Reads, and was a Globe and Mail and Washington Post Top 100 book. She is also the author of a collection of linked stories called Help Me, Jacques Cousteau, and 2 poetry collections, Primitive and Ashland. She lives in Toronto. Jill.
Hello, how are you guys?
We're just fine.
Good to know. I'm very pleased to see that I'm being translated here. I think this might be my first time being translated into sign language, so thank you very much for that. I don't know what kind of format you guys want to do with this Zoom meeting, because quite often with these things, there will be questions or a Q&A period or something like that. So do you have any preferences for what we do for the next few minutes?
There is a question and answer period after you've done your presentation.
Okay.
And I will pass, or I will ask the people, I will read out the questions that they have given for your answers.
Oh, that's great. That's great. Thank you. So what I'm going to do is just basically really pretend that I'm there and that I flew there and I'm in Lethbridge with you all. And imagine that I was on stage and I was going to introduce my book and I was going to do maybe a reading or two, short reading or two, so that you can understand what the language is like and what the story is like and that kind of thing. See if the book appeals to you. Does that sound okay?
That sounds perfect.
Good. Good. Okay. All right. Well, as you said, my name is Jill Adamson. I am a writer of fiction and poetry. I have 2 novels. I've written 2 novels. The first one came out quite a while ago, and it was called The Outlander. And it took me a number of years to write a second novel. As it turns out, the second novel is a bit of a follow-up. At first, I thought I was writing a sequel, and it is a sequel, but there is no need for new readers of this book to even know that The Outlander exists. It stands on its own. You can read it on its own and enjoy it without feeling like you're missing anything. So I was very careful when I was writing it to keep the reader in mind along those lines. So I'll show you the book, although you already had quite a nice graphic up there. Thank you very much. I don't know if I can show it to you here. Mm-hmm. So it has a really beautiful cover. Is it reversed? Is it reading normally for you? Because
it is. It's just fine.
You know what Zoom is like. My thing is reversed, so it looks backward to me. But it's really quite a lovely book. The designer did a great job. And House of Anansi in Toronto has also has re-released The Outlander, and it has a matching cover. And that book is either out right now, very, very recently, or very soon. So on the bookshelf, hopefully you'll see the 2 of them together, and they look lovely together. The book itself is set in 1917 between the areas. It's set in Alberta, and it's set in the sort of wilderness area between Banff and Lake Louise. At the time, Lake Louise had just recently been renamed from one of its original names, which was Lagan. In the book, I refer to it as Lagan, mostly because I think locals often take a long time to agree to a new name, especially when it's been imposed by the government. So, and also I just love the sound of Lagan. There is a scene in the book where one of the two main characters, there are two main characters. One is William Morland, who is known as the Ridge Runner, and the other is his son. And at a certain point in the book, William Morland visits Lethbridge, it was a very fun scene for me to write and to imagine what Lethbridge must have been like in 1917. So anyway, I'll read to you the description from the jacket copy, because I find that publishers do a lot better job introducing a book than writers do. Get all tongue-tied. So November 1917, William Morland is in mid-flight. After nearly 20 years, the notorious thief known as the Ridge Runner has returned, moving through the Rocky Mountains and across the border to Montana. The solitary drifter, impoverished in means and aged beyond his years, is also a widower and a father. And he is determined to steal enough money to secure his son's future. 12-year-old Jack Bolton has been left in the care of Sister Beatrice, a formidable nun who keeps him in cloistered seclusion in her grand old house. Though he knows his father is coming for him, the boy longs to return to his family's cabin deep in the woods. When Jack finally breaks free, he takes with him something the nun is determined to get back at any cost. Set against the backdrop of a distant war raging in Europe and a rapidly changing landscape in the West, Jill Adamson's follow-up to her award-winning debut, The Outlander, is a vivid historical novel that draws from the epic tradition of the literary Western, brimming with a cast of unforgettable characters, touched with humor and loss, and steeped in the wild of the natural world. I didn't intend that to sound as egotistical as it is. It's just a very nice introduction. So you can see that the story is about a man who is widowed and realizes that with the skills he has in his life, he really hasn't done enough to set his son up for the kind of life he would like the kid to have. And the only really good skill or useful skill he has is he's a heck of a burglar. And he also knows how to use dynamite. So he used to work in mining and logging, and dynamite is used in those industries, and he is an expert at it. So he knows how to use dynamite to, let's say, blow the door off, a building, get inside and get the money and disappear. And he's also a very fast runner, which is why his nickname is the Ridge Runner. So I will give you, would you like a short reading now? Would that be a decent thing? So what this will do is introduce you to William Morland, and it'll also give you a sense of what the writing is like, because my hope as a writer is to make the languages as beautiful as I can, and for the description to be as visual as I can, so that while readers are reading it, they can imagine themselves there. They can almost see themselves there, hopefully. So I'll just read from the first page and a little bit, so it'll maybe be 2 minutes. And this is from the first section that's called Without a Map. William Morland kept moving south. If the moon was bright, he walked all night, wading through dry prairie grass. He was alone and carried his meager belongings on his back. It was November, and snow clung to the hollows and shadows, but that snow was old, dry, delicate as meringue. He had come down the leeward side of the Rockies and had descended into the rolling grassland that runs from Alberta all the way to Montana. Having left the only real home he had ever known, he was heading for the border. Cold as the days were, the sun was intense. Every noon he boiled in his coat, and every night he lay shivering on the frigid ground, whined like a dog. After 4 days and nights, his feet were red. He suspected they were bloody by now, but he couldn't bring himself to pull off the boots and look. This was open country. To the east, long grass and low trees all the way to the horizon. But to the west, the land bled into the cloud-like silhouette of the mountains. Days ago, he had lost sight of the ranges he called home. And now he paced alongside peaks he remembered only dimly from long ago when he was a younger man, a line of only half familiar shapes, the faces of past acquaintances. He'd stolen everything he could from a ranger's station outside Banff, including a knapsack, a hatchet, matches, and a blanket with Rocky Mountains Park stenciled across the shoulder blades and Station 153 on the chest. He'd found nothing useful for hunting, no gun, not even a knife. So this is the main character, one of the two main characters, heading for Montana. And yeah, heading from, I think at the time, he's also thinking maybe Idaho. But where he's headed is mining camps and logging camps that he himself remembers from long before he became a father. And he's going to steal money from his former employers. So that gives you an idea of what he is about. I'll do another, if it's okay, I'll do another quick reading from that that section because maybe I won't. All right, I will. I'll read from just because I kind of like this scene, I'll tell you. The days got progressively warmer, and Moreland was as light and dry as firewood, unable to reflect on anything beyond the surety of where these vacant railroad tracks would lead him. Drawn almost by gravity to his goal, he was thoughtless, relentless, stiff, and awkward. And the day he walked into the mining town of St. Croix, Montana, and opened the door onto a diner full of people, he looked like some ghastly being out of mythology. Burned by the sun and looking half his natural weight, he was the color of the mud he'd slept in. His stolen uniform was dingled with burrs, and his hair was worse. His gait was uneven. Everything hurt. He floated into a booth, already drunk on the damp fragrance of cooking, hitched up his pants, and settled daintily on the banquette seat. The sticks of his shins showed above his boots. The terrified waitress stood with a hand to her throat. Moreland attempted a friendly smile, but it backfired entirely, for it was more like a rictus, and she clip-clopped into the kitchen and harried out a tall man who stood by the kitchen door, wiping his hands on a tea towel and scowling at Moreland. So that's him entering society for the first time in many days, and it's not going well. Anyway, that'll give you an idea of Moreland. The other thing to mention about Moreland is that he is a major character in my first novel, The Outlander. He is essentially, The Outlander was about Mary Bolton, who I call the widow in my first novel. And partway through the novel, she meets William Moreland. And I hope you guys find this interesting because I do too. Once I'd finished The Outlander and I was doing events like this, I had one in Alberta that was in Banff, and it was a large book club, and a lot of attended it, and there were many writers and many events, and it was a very busy weekend. So I did my event, which was wonderful. And then as it was wrapping up, a book clubber, a woman, was sitting next to me and kind of talking to herself. And she was saying that she wondered what William Morland and Mary Bolton would be like as parents, because by that point, Mary was pregnant. And it was interesting for a writer to think about that, because of course I knew, having created the characters, exactly what they would be like as parents. But what interested me was what their child would be like. What kind of person would they produce? Could they produce in terms of personality? What would they teach the child? And what kind of person could I create, and what kind of person would I like to live with if I wrote a second novel? And so I created Jack Bolton, their child, who is in this novel 12 years old, and then halfway through the novel he has his birthday and turns 13. But he has been living in the woods with his parents, his very private hermit parents, his whole life. He has experience with other people. They go into town, they do shopping, but mostly he's a little boy who lives in the woods. And as a result, has a lot of skills and a good understanding that I think a lot of kids in town don't have. However, while William Morland is on his crime spree, let's say, he has left the child in town with a woman he trusts, who is a nun, and her name is Sister Beatrice. The kid, for various reasons, doesn't have any idea what his father is up to. All he knows is that he's been abandoned, and he is not happy about it. So, what would it be like from a child's perspective to be angry at your father, to feel like you're orphaned, and to not understand what is going on in the adult world? So let me see if I can find it here. And this is where Jill doesn't know where yep, I got it. I really ought to put Post-its and more Post-its in my book. Sorry about that, guys. All right, so this is where we meet the kid. And I'll just read the first page. And I hope I'm reading slowly enough for the translation, because, and I apologize because some of the words I use are odd. And hard to translate. I also create, it seems, book titles that are hard to translate into other languages. So The Outlander, not easy to translate, and Ridge Runner, sorry, just next time I'll write a book with a simple title. So this is where we meet Jack Bolton, the kid. Now of a Sunday evening before dinner, Jack Bolton was standing behind the enormous house off Main Street in Banff, with his back to a tree, weeping into his hands. Weeping for his mother, raging at his father, mourning his old life until he was raw with it. The feeling came on so quickly, he had no choice but to rush out the kitchen door and into the pines. Within a minute, she noticed his absence, her yoo-hoo so shrill it scared the breath out of him. Stuttering to a stop, the boy gazed through the lattice of his fingers at the dead grass bending into the river, caught and swimming there. The snow, the water, the hands pressed to his face, everything glowing red as the sun burned and sank below the ranges. The boy dropped his hands and gazed up at those peaks, imagining his father out there, free. Jack raked back his hair, blew his nose sideways into a snowdrift, and tramped up the steps again. back into this new life in the nun's house in these ridiculous starched trousers. All he wanted to do was go home, but there was nothing left to go home to. The great house was far too large for 2 people. Several bedrooms, the sunroom, the drawing room were never used, their doors closed, curtains drawn, and even in summer, the air in those rooms was chilly and damp. Afternoon sun fell through stained glass on the front hall and through a sundial of colored light on the Persian runner. Mornings, he watched the needle of light crawl until it was time for school. The nun had a plan to resurrect the child from the ashes of his sad former life, to save him through good works. She was frantic in her labor, hopeful, determined. Jack was a patient kid, and he mostly liked her, so he submitted to the dismal diet of politeness and decency, tea time, bedtime, school time, prayers. He tolerated these starched new clothes, the unaccustomed bunching of underwear between his legs. The nun only ever spoke of the present, of herself and him together, and never of his past, for she believed that children, if children could be trained to remember, they could also be trained to forget. She hoped to make this boy's past, that cabin, those parents, all the shadows laid across his life, admit their final defeat and vanish from his mind. Neighbors, teachers, visitors to the house, all were instructed never to mention the parents. So they didn't. They simply stared. That gives you an idea of what the boy's life is like with the nun. And I have to say the nun was a very enjoyable character to create. I didn't give you a sense of what she's like from that reading, but she is formidable. She's very tough, and she's also very brittle. She's a complex character, and I had a good time writing her, and as I did with all of my characters, putting a little bit of myself. I put a little bit of myself into all my characters, and I think that most fiction writers do that. It's one way for you to, as you are writing, have compassion for the characters, even the villains. I think it's important for you to have, for a writer to have compassion, even for the negative characters or the complex characters, or even those that are doing damage. So I put a lot of myself into her. My own brittleness, and I've got characters who are very superstitious, and I happen to be superstitious. So she was really quite a lot of fun to write. I also had to do strange research, a lot of research for this book, historical research, because it is set during the First World War, and that is a very documented, very important moment in Western history. So I didn't want, even though the book is set basically in the woods, mostly in the woods, I didn't want to get anything wrong in terms of the war. And as you know, because you're from Alberta, there is also the issue of the prisoner of war camp at Castle Mountain. So I wanted to include that as well. So I did a lot of research on that. Research is funny because often you'll do a great deal of research on some very specific thing only to find that it turns into 1 or 2 sentences. But it's important, I think, to do that kind of research, to do that much research, even if it doesn't really show up much, because at least you understand the terrain, you understand what life was like, let's say, daily in the prisoner of war camp. There is a book called In the Shadow of the Rockies, which is a very good book for anyone who's interested in studying that. I'm sure there are lots of people in Alberta who are way, way ahead on this. But the thing I appreciated about that book is it had a transcript of the daily military diary of the camp, which gave everything from the high and low temperatures, the basic weather, whether they'd had an escape, who'd been court-martialed, who was on leave. And so it gave me as an author a feeling, a daily feeling of what it was like. And I went over it so many times, I almost felt like I knew some of the individual prisoners of war because their numbers kept turning up. And of course, they were referred to by their number. So there's an example of doing a lot of research, and yet the prisoners of war in my novel are almost always seen from a distance. And there's a reason for that. I think I just needed Jack to be distant, the child to be distant from that kind of thing, and not necessarily involved in it in any way. So I mentioned research, but I also had to do research about the nun because I am not religious, and she's an Anglican nun, and I know very little, if anything, about the life of nuns. But luckily, I have a friend whose parents are Anglican, and they have known over their long career many nuns. So I was able to ask these strange little questions, like if a nun has taken an absence, a leave of absence from the abbey, is she's still allowed to wear the habit? Because I really wanted my nun to revert to the habit every now and then when she's feeling uncertain of herself. She reverts to the habit for comfort. So, this will give you an idea of the kind of strange research required for fiction. So I don't know what else to talk about here. Do we have any, if we have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Certainly. There are some questions here, but I want to tell you your research is wonderful. And it must have taken you numerous months and years to do all this, but it's very enjoyable what you're talking about.
Oh, great. Thank you.
But the first question we have for you is, I enjoyed The Ridge Runner so much. How did you know about those poisons?
Now, this will be a bit of I'm going to try not to spoiler it because there is, here's an interesting thing. The book, I hope, will be my first novel, won an award called the Dashiell Hammond Award, and that is an award for crime writing. And though I was perplexed by that, I said, it's a Western, but then I thought about it. There's crime in the Outlander. It's on the first page, we find out that she's killed her husband. And there's even more crime in The Ridge Runner, including poisonings. And I needed to know, okay, the question was simple, Jill, just answer it. There is a wonderful book called A is Arsenic, and it goes through all of the relevant books written by Agatha Christie. Agatha Christie was at one point a dispenser, a chemical dispenser. And so she knew her drugs and she knew her poisons, and she used it in her writing. And generally speaking, she gets A+ for accuracy. So that was a useful book for me because I had a very specific idea that I wanted to use thallium salts, and I had to understand basically how they worked, at least as much as a novelist can. So I read that book, but I also pored over all kinds of horrific articles, medical articles on testing thallium on animals, and sort of historical use of thallium as a, they used to call it the inheritance drug, the inheritance poison, because, it was a good way to get rid of if you wanted their money. And in fact, a lot of these things that we call poison now were used as, you know, thallium, for instance, was used as a hair remover. Because they noticed that when it was used as a rat poison, and they noticed that when the rats were dying, their hair was coming out. So, hey, why don't we put it on our legs? So there are things like that. This is another of these idiosyncratic rabbit holes that a writer ends up in when they ask the simple question, gee, you know, how long does thallium take? The answer is actually quite complex. To make someone sick, how long does it take to kill them? You know, what are the symptoms? Would the person know that they'd been poisoned? You know, it's not always. So that's a short answer as to how I learned about all the chemicals and drugs and poisons. But there's one concoction in there that I just made up. I call it Pax, and it's a sort of a sleep aid. It's a sort of a turn of the last century sleep aid I made up, that if you take a little bit of it, you'll go to sleep you'll sleep. Don't worry, you'll sleep. And if you take too much of it, it's very dangerous. So some of it is researched and some of it is made up.
Oh, that's very enlightening. I love that. Oh, and the second question we have here is, I loved The Outlander. It was outstanding. I am looking forward to reading Ridge Runner. Can you tell me about your writing process? What tech program do you use when writing, and what are key things you would suggest for new authors?
Okay, that's two things, and actually very good questions, because the first question is really about method, and some writers insist on writing longhand with a pen and a paper, and that's how they think best. My handwriting is so awful that it distresses me when I have to read my own handwriting. The second computers were available to the home, I was on, not least because I loved typewriters. There's something lovely about using a typewriter, but having to retype a 10-page story again because it's full of typos made me nuts. So I use Word. I just use plain old Word. I format it, 12-point double spaced, as simple and as readable as possible. I don't, as some writers do, almost format it as if I was typesetting it. I leave that to the typesetter, but some imagine it as a book. So I use a computer and I use Word. The second question was about what do you suggest for new writers, and that's not just young writers, because you can start writing at any age. Carol Shields is a prime example. I can't remember how old she was when she started, but maybe in her 50s. It's one of those things that uses your brain, not your body. So for new writers, I would say one of the best things you can do is to attend a workshop. It's good to present your work, even if it's in process and unfinished and raw, in front of other people. Even if their feedback isn't all that useful to you, the process of handing it over will be. And the other piece of advice I would give is you can't really be a writer unless you read. Read, I would suggest as well reading out just slightly outside your comfort zone. Don't just read the same thing over and over. Extend yourself a little bit. You will learn about writing from writers whose work you disagree with. You learn by looking at the choices that they've made and seeing at a very granular, very sentence level what you would do differently. But mostly, if you're reading writers that are better than you, and there's always writers that are better than you, there's always a bigger fish, you learn very fast. So find those books that really speak to you and that you love, and go over them again and again. Pay attention to what the writer did and the choices that writer made, because sometimes on a first reading, that's not obvious. And then on a second reading, you go, oh, look what she did there. Look what he did there. Look what they did there. That's really important, studying books that speak to you. So I hope that answers the question.
I think that's incredible. That's a lot of information there that I'm interested in. And the next question is, you said there was a time span between your two novels. What helped you to finish this book?
That's a good question, and it's a difficult. There are several answers to that. One of the first things is that right after I finished The Outlander, my father had a stroke, and died a year and a half after that. And I was very close to my dad. He was a very good father, so I was pretty shattered by that, and it's hard. I was talking to Marina Endicott about this and various other writers who agree that it's hard to write when you're under stress and you really do need contentment. And in some cases, boredom, to be able to sit down and write and actually focus on the work. So, so I really had to get over that. I had to recover from that. Also, the publicity for The Outlander went on for several years because it was published in different countries, and they would invite you to festivals. So I was doing a bit of travel, and I get nervous even with things like this. This is a very personal and intimate and fun and easy kind of event, but I get nervous. People get nervous just doing a Zoom meeting. We all understand that, but getting on a plane, and standing on stage, I just was very happy to get back to my little office and get back to work. So hopefully the next book, which I have begun, won't take quite so long. I hope that answers the question too.
That's wonderful. The last question, well, that's on my page right now, it's talked about nuns. It's, have you ever known a nun yourself? And you answered this question earlier, but let me carry on with the question. What was it about nuns in general that fascinated you? I always thought I would end up being a nun. Luckily, not so far.
No, I love that. Not so far. This person is holding out the hope. It might, don't never say never. I think one of the things, and I wrote this in the book, what drew my nun, Sister Beatrice, she actually insists that you pronounce it in the Italian way, Beatrice, but we'll call her Sister Beatrice. And her name, that's her name in religion, and her name in secular life is Amelia Claude. I realized that for a clever person, for a clever options available, especially if she wanted an education, an abbey offered that. It offered removal from a world in which your only purpose, given your family's attitude perhaps, was to get married. And for women not interested in getting married, for women who would like an education, religion and an abbey was a good idea. And the abbey she goes to is associated with a hospital and with a teaching hospital. So she got all kinds of medical training and skills that she wouldn't have got otherwise. And some of the other women in the abbey are there. Families couldn't feed them, or because they would rather die than get married to a man. So there are all kinds of reasons to end up in an abbey. And I found it fascinating because of the possibility of it being both, what's the word? A nurturing and safe environment, and also a very odd environment. If your cellmate is an oddball, you're stuck with them. fun for you. So that's what fascinated me. It was the community situation that fascinated me. Did I break up there for a second?
Just a bit, yes.
Okay, I got a little thing that said my internet connection is, well, cross your fingers.
Okay. I don't see any more questions here, but I have a question for you.
Sure.
No, it's a question. My question was, is Jack based on any character or any child or anybody that you know? Kept saying a child there, that you must know this child.
Oh, that is the greatest thing to hear. Thank you so much. That suggests to me that the character comes across as a person. And that's my goal in writing fiction, is to create characters that people feel are possible and real. So thank you. No, Jack is not based on anyone except in so much as I say, I put myself into the characters, and Jack's equanimity and his how can I put this? His intense feelings about his parents that's me. So, and actually, I have to say, now that we brought this up, just very quickly, I took it seriously that I was writing a teenage boy, having never myself been a teenage boy. So I had to proceed very carefully. And again, these strange research moments that you do, I was asking every man I knew, so what was it like for you at 13? And oddly enough, very few of them had much to say. I know that if I were to ask women, what was it like for you at 13? They'd have a lot to say. So that was interesting for me.
Great. Oh, okay.
So here we are.
Well, I think I've gone through all these questions. Is there another one that I missed?
Let me see.
Let me see. Oh, maybe I did. Did you? Oh, yeah. Here's one right here. Did you work on the second novel for as many years, or were you doing other things in the meantime, or was just doing the novel?
I was working on the novel the whole time. I'm slow, and as you can, I hope, hear from the language, I'm a careful writer, and I pay a lot of attention to every sentence. I've made a vow that I'm going to write a novel that is, where the language isn't quite so I don't know how to describe it, hard for me to write. So yeah, I really was working on it. Now, was I sitting down every day and spending 5 hours? No, writers come and go. We drift off. We have these patches of insanity where we just have to write all the time and have ideas, and then you run out of mental energy and you have to wait for it to wait for the batteries to recharge. So yes and no. That's the answer.
I have one more quick question. Was it a challenge to write the Indigenous characters well?
I hope I wrote them. I hope I wrote them well. Yes.
Yeah.
I'm glad you asked that, because I'm interested that no one has asked me about that element before. Yes, I took that extremely seriously and was terrified of overstepping, making a mistake. And so what I did with Samson, I call him the character who calls himself Samson Beaver, because he's had a number of different names and a number of different identities over his life. He's a very independent hermit who doesn't go by other people's rules. So what I did was, Samson himself is Muskogee. He's not Nakota, but he's married to a Nakota woman, so he's fluent in Nakota. and has raised children in a Nakota community. He now lives out in the woods. He loves his wife and she loves him, but they don't live together. What I did was, as I could, for to understand Nakota culture as much as is possible for someone like me. I also read by an Indigenous person. It's called a sensitivity reading, and I got the okay on that. So, and the other thing I did, because there is Nakota dialogue in the book, and yes, I did try to find. There are a number of sites, and one particular good site that gives you very basic um, phrases and words in Nakota. So I plugged in. There's probably 10 lines of dialogue in Nakota. So I plugged in what I thought was approximately right, and eventually managed to find a man named Buddy Wesley. I call him Elder Buddy, but his name is Buddy Wesley, and he's from Morley, Alberta, and he very kindly agreed to check my work, correct the dialogue, and he has a specific way of dealing with the diacritical marks in order to indicate, in Roman script, the various sounds of Nakota words. So, file that under, thank goodness, because while Nakota people, there's a high literacy rate amongst Nakota people, it's a rather small group as compared to, let's say, Navajo people or something like that. So to have someone who is an expert at translation, who is willing to work with someone like me, and who did it just very quickly and in a very jolly way, I fell in love with him, was really a miracle. So that's probably more than that's probably more of an answer than you expected, but there you go.
Oh, this is very endearing to me. And this has been a wonderful meeting with you via Zoom.
It has been, thank you.
And we had a few little interruptions there with the breaking up, but we understood everything that you were saying. And we thank you so much for being part of Word on the Street in this 2020 year.
Thank you so much for having me. Thanks for inviting me. I am sorrowing that I'm not there because I really would like to be there. I like Lethbridge and I've been there a number of times. I haven't really spent a lot of time in Lethbridge, but I like it. It's also a place to get a good pair of cowboy boots.
Oh.
And thank you so much for translating me with sign language. This is the first time and I'm honored.
Bye.
Bye, thank you. Bye.